Residential users can't use restricted use pesticides, is that correct? Okay, so I don't want us to get off track. This is about restricted use pesticides, and that's what this bill is about. Okay. We will be taking up those other pesticide questions, but purpose of these measures is on restricted use pesticides, and that broad discussion, which is all the research and all of the requests for testimony has been about today. Okay. Okay, thank you. Let's see, other questions? Yes.
So for the Department of Agriculture, the figures that Councilman Hoosier gave was that over the past 3 years, there was by the 5 seed companies total on the island of Kauai, an annualized amount of restricted use pesticides were used, 5,477 pounds and 4,324 gallons. Is that roughly your figures? Is that an accurate amount?
Okay, for that period, according to my records, the average use 9.89 tons of active ingredient. Now you have to understand, pesticides are sold either dry weight or gallon. A volume gallon, a lot of people think it's 8 pounds. That's not the case. Product like cologne, it may weigh 10 pounds. Others are active, and again, the active is the side that does the killing.
Okay, so you have about
0.89
9.89
tons
tons over the 3-year period? Okay,
of active ingredient.
okay, and that's between the 5.
No, there's 4 seed and 1 coffee.
4 seed and 1 coffee, okay. When you take a look at all other users of restricted use pesticides combined on the island of Kauai, what's the amount of active ingredient by weight over that same 3-year period?
Combined, I will say that with the threshold that they set, those were the largest users. I can't give you a percentage.
No, I'm not asking for a percentage.
Yeah.
You're saying that 9.89 tons were used by the 4 seed companies and the coffee farm
Correct.
over that 3-year period. Are there other users of restricted use pesticides on the island of Kauai?
Yes.
Okay,
Of course.
what was the total?
I don't have.
Okay, because I just want to
Yes.
know, like, how far apart are they? For the island of Oahu, where the seed companies are also operating, over that 3-year period, what was the weight of the active ingredients used?
I don't have that information in front of me, but we can get that for you.
Is it safe to say, though, in follow-up to Coach's question, that the big agricultural companies are using gigantic amounts of restricted use pesticides and the other users are barely using any in comparison? Is that a fair statement?
No, I said they're using a lot more, but not gigantic. So the word that you're using, let's be honest and just,
Well, you didn't bring the numbers, sir. You didn't have the numbers. Did you prepare for this hearing or not?
Not
You didn't.
statewide.
You should have those numbers here if you're going to be a good representative of the state. If you're going to challenge my word of gigantic, bring the numbers next time and do the job.
I guess in the follow-up, what I'd be interested in knowing is to be able to compare the proportion of restricted use pesticide on the island of Kauai, but also on the island of Oahu, because I know we do have some larger farming operations here on Oahu. And so if you can get that to the chairs
By tomorrow.
for them to distribute it, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Chair.
Oh, yeah, I have a question for the Director of Agriculture, please. So I was reading your testimony, I noticed you mentioned that our bill does not demonstrate the connection between our threshold criteria. And, you go on to say that a low volume purchaser of restricted use pesticides might actually cause an equal amount of harm through less careful application. Are you suggesting that we should include much lower volumes as a threshold, or are you saying that any threshold does not work?
No, what I would first point out, which is what I pointed out in my brief introductory remarks, is that with everything that we do in terms of regulating pesticides, be science-based. The data that we have at the Hawaii Department of Agriculture in terms of abuses of restricted use pesticides show us that it's our smaller agriculturalists that are more prone to abuse than the companies that have been targeted. because, we can see quite obviously from the testimony that's been given, this is one segment of agriculture. It's the biotechnology companies that have been targeted. And we don't have the data, Chair, to show that they're the problem in applying pesticides. We
Well,
just
this
don't have
bill
it.
also addresses use by schools and institutions like that. I mean, I've heard many times that it's targeting a certain group of farmers and nobody else. The bill includes other people who use these same pesticides. I find it hard to understand how you think we're targeting farmers when it seems that the bill is targeting users, large users of restricted use pesticides. Period. Not small users, not users of any pesticides, large users of restricted use pesticides. We're targeting those users of the pesticides, not farmers, right?
That would be correct.
Okay, so in terms of the science-based aspect, do you agree that there's any risk whatsoever with the large-scale use of pesticides?
It depends on the application. And, if the application is according to label, everything that the department knows. Now, the Hawaii Department of Agriculture, along with all 50 states, relies on our federal partners to test the technology, be it biotechnology or be it pesticides. And so what we know is that if you use the product according to the label, it's safe.
Is there no risk whatsoever?
There's always risk.
Okay.
And there's risk in the human.
So let's look at a science-based approach to risk. We have risk. We don't know exactly where it comes into play, at what threshold, and at what distances. Is the appropriate response to an unknown level of risk zero regulation?
No. It would be the short answer.
Thank you.
Quick follow-up, and then I'm going to move right here. Just how many regulators do you have, Director, on Kauai?
One.
Okay, so that was correct. I just want to check.
No, that's correct.
And Maui?
Maui, 2, 1, 1.
Is that sufficient?
We are in the stages of hiring the second inspector of Kauai.
So you'll have 3 to cover those 2 islands after the hiring.
After the hiring, correct. But we also have inspectors on Oahu. If there's a need, we will fly the inspectors from Oahu to Kauai if there's some kind of incident that requires that.
My observation is that's not a lot of manpower to check a lot of major farming activity.
That's correct. But we are relying on the training for the certified applicators. We hold them to a higher standard.
But we hold them to a higher standard, but without anybody to hold them. That's the problem. There's no one to.
True, but we have all different type of inspections, not only with the farmers, but the seed companies. We have the regular vegetable farmers, taro growers. We have the pest control operators. We respond to complaints. We also check with the stores that sell pesticide products to be sure that it is properly licensed.
But you only have these very small number of people,
Exactly, and that's, yeah.
which is a large portion of this problem.
Sure.
Yeah, a couple questions. I came in late, I'm sorry, but is it true that some of the restricted use pesticides that are being used here in Hawaii by the large agribusiness companies are banned in other countries?
Yes.
Okay, and could I have the representative from Syngenta come forward, please?
Very last week's the back. You're too little of a conversation.
Yeah, get out of here. Thank you. And your name was Mark Phillipson, is that correct?
That's correct.
Maybe this is more than an observation, but my understanding is that atrazine is banned in the European Union and in Switzerland. I understand that Syngenta is based in Switzerland. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so, as the maker of atrazine, Syngenta and other companies are using large quantities of atrazine here in Hawaii, but you are not allowed to use that in Switzerland. Is that correct?
Yeah, atrazine is a product that was discovered in the 50s and was discovered by American companies at that time and was acquired by Syngenta, which is a Swiss-based company today. Syngenta is a company that was founded in 2001.
And back to DOA, my understanding is that the paraquat is used by Kauai coffee, and maybe other large ag operations, but that's banned in over 36 countries. Is that correct or incorrect?
I'm not sure about the number of countries banned in, but it is used locally. It's a restricted use pesticide, it's an herbicide.
Just to follow, I never quite heard the answer. Is atrazine banned in Switzerland?
Yes,
Thank you.
it's
I
actually,
just never heard the answer to Sam's question.
and it's actually well studied. There's about 7,000 studies on atrazine.
Are you saying that it's safe?
I'm saying that there's 7,000 studies.
So why is it banned in Switzerland then? I mean, I think you're defending atrazine here, right? So let me just have you elaborate. Why do you think Switzerland bans it?
Yeah, in my feeling, it's a political ban,
Okay, thank you.
not scientific one.
Thanks. Tom, I have a question for you, and that is, when we read the labels, because that's often said, the label is the law. We read the labels for a specific product. Do they ever recommend setbacks?
Some labels may refer to setbacks, do not apply to every waterways to 25 feet distance. Some may, I think if you use it in a nursery, depends on the type of application, they may have a buffer zone, maybe 100 feet. But this would be kind of
And how do they come up with those? How do they come up with those
scientific.
setbacks?
Again, the label, certain products, most of the products will not have a number. What they will have is a statement that says avoid drift, or do not apply this product in a way that will contact a worker or anyone else.
So some of these, since the focus is on RUPs, there are RUPs that are identified as you need to set back certain distances.
Not
Or that there are, okay.
Yes, but that whole label takes into consideration the product, how it's
So
used,
based on the product, there are recommended setbacks for certain reasons.
and also, yeah,
And the wind drift, okay, we heard earlier today that, dust, does the Department of Agriculture, do we consider that, or the Department of Health, do we consider dust as part of a drifting nuisance or indeed problem? Or
we do not regulate dust or vapors.
should we?
Well, the dust would be the Department of Health.
Okay, thank you. There was if I may, a couple more. There was an incident in November in Waialua. There's a little co-op with small farmers, and they live right behind some folks on Kluge Street. And they got a big waft of something nauseous. So hazmat came out and everything else, and it was found out that there was an RUP applied by a migrant farmer. And I'm just what I'm getting at is here's a guy who was not authorized to be using the RUP, a Thionix or something like that, and it was a windy day and it blew into these guys' house, so he's doubly violating the laws. How do we go back and go after that, and what's the procedure for trying to get somebody who clearly violates the law like that?
On that case, my inspector went out. What the hazmat found was an empty container Thionix that was there. We could not find an applicator to link to any pesticide. And I think some of the people up there said it smelled more like malathion. So again, just finding this Thionix container, it was surmised that, this
So it
was,
wasn't measured.
yeah, well, this was what was being used. So we could not find an applicator.
Do you take samples of the crops or anything in the vicinity? Do you swab? Or?
By the time we got out there, it was fairly, there was no odor to be detected.
Okay, thanks. And the last question then on drift. There's certain rules on the label. I imagine that it has not more than 5 miles an hour wind or not more than 10.
Certain
Do they have those in
products,
there?
certain products will say do not apply if the wind speed exceeds 14 miles an hour. Again, if you see the language that says avoid drift, and again, I'll have to get back to the EPA registration of the product. They spent like 5 to 10 years looking at all the data. And the data, yes, it does come in from the registrar. However, it is EPA that sets how and what you report. It's not, I'm just feeding you this and you're just gonna take that. So I want to clarify that.
So, final question, Chair, please. So the concern really is people don't want this stuff drifted under their house. I don't want it, you don't want it. I don't know anybody that wants a drift coming in. How can we assure the public, how can we beef up our Department of Agriculture or inspect it? Or what can we do to help meet that? Because I think that might cut straight to the crux of the
Main thing is if you, the residents, you detect an odor and you suspect it's a pesticide, call us. A lot of times a hazmat responds first. We get another call. We are working with the Department of Education for them to also let us know when it happens so we can get out there right away and do our investigation. And this is for statewide. The other thing is school IPM. We are working with DOE and they hired a consultant to do school IPM. For the last 4 years, I have been working with DOE facilities and offered training to the school administrators, head custodians, cafeteria managers. They apply pesticides. We will do pesticide training, table comprehension, and safety. And we've offered this statewide, and I've got 3 enforcement staff to do that.
Wouldn't you say though it's too late once the drift of pesticides already come through a community for people just to make the call?
No,
Pesticides already gone through their house?
we can come and take swab samples to detect.
Find out what it was, but now
Or gas
that
samples.
family, that child, what was your name, Chelsea?
Yes.
She's got a child that's got autism. She's living out in Kauai. She's got pesticide drift. Sure, she can call and tell you and have your one inspector and whatever other support, get involved, but her family has now been exposed to the pesticide drift. I would call that too late. I had a question over there. Right here.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to kind of explore a different element of this measure. My questions are for you, Scott. The buffer zones have flag distances on them, and with whatever the figure may be at a later time, we're potentially rendering a lot of productive land as fallow. And by doing that, are we opening up the state to potential lawsuits from people who now, or companies or farmers who can now not be productive with whatever the distance is, and then have them turn around and sue the state for the loss of revenues from that land that we've almost kind of condemned?
Yes, would be the short answer, Vice Chair. Potentially, that is the case.
And on another element about the students in the schools being protected here, is there any way that we can tailor the restrictions of pesticides to certain hours of the day? So if the student is there from 8 till 3, then we tell the farmers that if you're going to be spraying, you do it after hours when there aren't kids that are going to be prone or subjected to these pesticides.
I would think, yes, that's something we could definitely try to work with, Vice Chair.
And I noticed in your testimony, you're going to do some type of fact-finding project on Kauai. Can you tell us what you're searching for with that project?
The joint fact-finding that was started this January in conjunction with the Mayor's Office on Kauai and the Hawaii Department of Agriculture put together a team to take a look at all the concerns that were brought out in the course of the testimony for 2491, the bill that went through the county government and was overturned by Judge Kern. To the extent that the community has concerns, whether it's public health concerns or it's concerns about the pesticide applications on the island, the Hawaii Department of Agriculture wants to know if it's a reality, if there's anything going on. So put together a team that's run by Peter Adler, who's done this work before. He has retained Bruce Anderson, who was once the head of the Department of Health here in the state of Hawaii and is an epidemiologist. So he'll be looking at the concerns that were expressed by Wendell earlier, and I've spoken with Wendell on the west side of Kauai. We need to find out if that's in fact the case. But again, it's scientific inquiry. We need to go in and substantiate what's going on with pesticide usage on the west side of Kauai and around the state. It's a model for the rest of the state, and substantiate or find out that it's not the case. There's some other factors that are contributing to it. So in the course of this next year, we're going to address all of the concerns that came out in the course of 2491. That's the work that we're doing.
I think Wendell, the researcher, provided us a very compelling testimony about how you put all these various chemicals together, make some kind of pesticide cocktail out of all of it, and then all of a sudden the research numbers could shift. So in your research on Kauai, are you looking at not just a singular use of these pesticides, but then as a, for lack of a better term, a pesticide cocktail, and what those effects would be on the neighboring communities?
That is one of the things that will be looked at. In the end, we'll also find out if we need to do further research. You know, when I first went to Hawaii with the governor and sat in a room, what I was told is that there were cancer clusters on the west side of Hawaii. So the state has done a study on cancer on Kauai, and we found out every type of cancer, consistent with national and state trends, is in decline, except for melanoma. You know, it was stated in that meeting that the runoff, that the pesticide usage was so heavy on the west side, it was running off into the waterways and going down and killing off sea life. So the Department of Agriculture funded a study by the state's Department of Health, Environmental Health, to take a look at water quality statewide, which is how we found out Manoa was far worse than any place else in the state. Pesticide runoff. But there was nothing that was above tolerance levels on Kauai. Everything was significantly less. And currently, there's a study that should be coming out shortly from the Department of Health on birth defects, which was another claim that potentially pesticide usage on Kauai was producing birth defects. So, you know, much as the question about dust, you know, we don't, at the Department of Agriculture, regulate dust. But if it's coming off of agricultural lands, the Department of Agriculture is concerned, and that's why we're taking a look on the west side of Kauai and every place. We'll take a look and we'll see what's in the dust. We'll do that testing. But we're trying to be proactive at this point and see if we can follow up on the concerns of the public.
Thank you, Director. I have one final question over here, Chair.
Yeah, for DOA. Are there any laws requiring companies to disclose the chemicals that they're using? For example, if I'm a homeowner and I'm living adjacent to the fields that are being sprayed, that I may suspect I'm being exposed to drift.
I think no is the short answer, but I'll defer to Tom.
Right. Only if we are responding to a complaint, we would ask them to reveal what was used. And also the other part, if there's exposure in the school or to a family, we respond, we will give that information to the treating physician.
And the follow-up is, are there any laws that prevent the application of RUPs on fields directly adjacent to schools, hospitals, or homes?
No.
No laws.
Not that.
One more question for Department of Agriculture. Scott, I hear you say that you've tested and found no seemingly dangerous levels of pesticides in places like West Kauai and places where we've seen so much concern. You've seen 3 counties pass laws on this subject. You've heard a list of 400 members of the public coming forward with extreme concerns. We've heard some of the stories. I hear you saying that there's really no problem and we shouldn't put any controls into place. What do you make of this public concern? Is it mass hysteria? What do you think is going on here?
I don't know that I would characterize any of my comments or thoughts in saying that we don't need to regulate. And having a conversation about pesticide use in the state is useful. So I welcome the opportunity. But if you look at the advent of this conversation, it started with an attempt to ban GMOs. It was against the biotech companies, and the pesticide use became a wedge issue. And in 2 of the counties, they were anti-biotech prohibitions. And on Hawaii, it started out as an anti-biotech prohibition and morphed into a pesticide regulation bill.
Sorry, Chair. Go ahead.
No,
I think so.
Well, so, I mean, okay, so GMO is a related issue, but we've heard so many stories of people concerned about their neighbors being sick, the gentleman from Kauai, do you think this is really all a ruse? This is a sort of a farce to be a proxy for the GMO fighter? Do you think there's real concerns about pesticide use in our communities?
Certainly there's concerns. I was just giving you the advent of it.
I'm familiar with that.
So, the question again?
Well, what do you make of all this concern over there's this clamoring, both at the county government level and the public level, for some increased controls over pesticide use near schools, residences, and large quantities of restricted use pesticides. What do you make of it all in the face of your statement that these regulations we're proposing are necessary or appropriate?
Yeah, and again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have the conversation and look at regulations. I was just saying they should be driven by science. So, and in the same way that this chair, with the Department of Agriculture, started the joint fact-finding on Kauai and is going to do it elsewhere, I take seriously the concerns of the public. And to the extent that there's a problem with pesticide usage any place in the state, the Hawaii Department of Agriculture wants to know about it so that we can react.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm just going to wrap up this statement and then we'll come to some votes. I take it to heart. I mean, I have a great deal of respect for you, and I genuinely appreciate your directness and candor. But when you say you take it seriously, and I know you take it seriously, but then when you sit across the table and you tell me you have one individual for Kauai and one individual for Maui to police, to regulate the issue. And I sit next to a former head of DLNR, who's now a senator, and she reminds me that we passed, and promoted additional positions, not to mention, of course, you as leaders of the departments, looking at this gigantic outcry, again, I use that word because it is big, okay? I don't understand if we say we're taking it seriously. Those are words, but the actions. We have multiple families that need some response, and we have multiple chemical companies and multiple other users that we have to follow up with. Even if we decide and determine ultimately that there's no significant or serious threat, do we not demonstrate a more serious concern with a lot more manpower and focus? And that is the question I have for you. It does not appear to me that the problem and the concern, because concern in society is a major part of what we do, because we need to reassure people, we need to study. I'm not trying to open up a can of worms with the precautionary principle, but I'm saying from a psychological standpoint, when many thousands of members, in fact, we're over 100,000 members that have reached out as a part of this dialogue, don't feel safe or satisfied, do we not owe them more attention and regulation, even if it ultimately proves safe? We spend a lot more money and time on issues that affect far fewer people. So what is the department prepared to do to address that concern?
We are, in fact, filling our positions that are open, Chair. The challenge for the Hawaii Department of Agriculture is in the last economic downturn, we lost 40% of our staffing.
40% of one?
Of the entire department.
Okay. Because 40% of one is what we got now.
We have 110 open positions that we're trying to fill. And so we need to give each of the different aspects of work that we do in the department people weight. So I work on it twice already this week. We are filling the position, but we also have to fill our plant quarantine inspector positions and others. So we're quickly moving on it.
We appreciate that.
Additional inspectors on both Maui and Kauai.
Okay. We'll take a brief recess when we come to a vote on these measures and then proceed. Thank you, gentlemen.